Hello and welcome. The next thing that I will do here is I will add a state machine to my ship that will allow me to aim the ship wherever I have the mouse cursor on the screen. And we have to keep in mind that the X relationship and the Y relationship of the mouse cursor and the position of our ship in 3D space aren't exactly the same. And so we need to convert this information. In order to do that, we're going to add another state machine to our ship. So I can either select the ship and then in the editor window right click, add FSM and say new, or another way I can do it is in the state machine drop down tab at the top of the editor window. I can come down and just say add. I will name this FSM the ship aim. And as far as this state 1 that it created, I will name this aiming ship. And we're just going to use this single state to do this. As far as the actions that we're going to put into this state, I need to get mouse information. So if I search for mouse, you'll notice that we have a get mouse X and a get mouse Y. And these inputs here are kept track of automatically for us by Unity. If you go to the edit menu and down to project settings input, you'll see we have in the inspector a list of axes that Unity keeps track of, and mouse X and mouse Y are in this list. So once we've collected their value, we need to store it, and we can do that in this store result box. We can say new variable. If we do it this way, I'll call this mouse X, it will create the variable for us. Another way that I could do this is over in the variables tab. I could come down and say mouse Y, but I need to know what kind of variable type to store. You can see up here that the mouse X that I created automatically came in as a float. So if I create a mouse Y as a float and say add, I now have two variable containers. However, back in this state, this mouse Y is not yet mapped. I created it over here, and so I need to tell it to use mouse Y. So most of the time I'll just say new variable unless I already have one, and I'll create them that way. It just seems a little simpler. Now that we have these actions, if I hit play and we let it load, you'll notice as I move my mouse around that we get value. The bottom left of the screen essentially represents the 0x 0y space. If I were to move straight up from that, I'd have a 0x and a 1y. If I were to move straight right from the bottom corner, I would have a 1x and a 0y. And if I were to go to the top right hand corner of the screen, we would have a 1, 1. And the reason is that these are currently being normalized. If I were to uncheck them, we'd have values in the larger numbers of hundreds. And so the way that I want to use these actions is normalized, because the screen space and size may change depending on what system we decide to run this game on. And so we'd like this to stay track of that screen size 1 to 1. Now that we have this mouse information, we need to convert it into 3D world information. And we can do that with an action of screen to point. So screen to world point here. We need to pass the screen X and Y information into this, and we'll do that with those values we created just a minute ago. So I'll pass mouse X into the screen X, and I will pass mouse Y into the screen Y. As far as the screen Z here is concerned, we need to know the depth from our camera down to our player. And if we select the camera and look, I have it set at a depth of 20. So back here on my player ship, I want to take and set this screen Z here to 20. And that will keep the cursor location that it's trying to set at the depth of the actual player in the screen. And then since I'm normalizing the values up here, I also want to normalize the values in my screen to world point. As far as what information we want to get out of this, my ship is going to move in X and Z. Even though I'm getting an X and a Y here, I can convert that information into a world X and a world Z. And so in here, I'll make new containers, and I will call this one my world X, and I will call the other one my world Z. Okay. So I'm going to minimize these actions up here so you can see this one a little better. And when I hit play now, oh, let me stop and make sure that we do this action here every frame. Now what you'll see is if I am at the dead center of my screen, if I can get there, we'll more or less have a 0, 0, and I'll have a negative x value to the left, a positive x value to the right, a positive y value as we move up, and a negative y value as we move down. Now this information is much more useful. I can use these positives and negatives as left, rights, ups, and downs to move the ship. So the way that we're going to do that is I need to basically position an object in space wherever the mouse happens to be, and then tell the ship to look at that object. So in my hierarchy, I will create a new object, and I'll use a sphere for now so that you can actually see it. I will name this sphere my ship aim location, and then I'll just click the reset in the transform so that it's nice and zeroed out. Back over on my player ship, we have information in here now that we can use. I need to essentially set the position of this ship aim location to whatever this information happens to be. So we'll add in the action browser a set position. And then we will take the game object that we want to set and we'll open the drop down. We don't want to use the owner of the FSM. That is the player's ship. I don't want to be moving it around. I want to specify the game object. And then I can take this ship aim location and I can drag and drop it down here into this set position. And again, this is one of those situations where I can do this because my ship is not a prefab. And if I did prefab it, I would need to have a variable location for this. As far as the position I want to set this in space, the X I would like wherever my world X value has been converted. So we're going to get that mouse X and convert it into a world X, and then we will set our sphere, which we now have called the ship aim, we will set the location of its X to that. And then as far as the Z is concerned, we will set the sphere's Z to world Z. And then I don't want it ever to deviate in height. So I can click here and tell it to set my Y to 0, which happens to be the value my ship is at. And then lastly, I will tell this to work in world space, and I want it to happen every single frame. Now if I hit play and we test this, we'll see that wherever my cursor is, the sphere will be set and it will be moved to, which is perfect. And now I can tell the ship to look at this object. So the next thing we will do after we set the position of this object is we'll look in our action browser for a look. Now we have a couple of these. We have a smooth look at, which I'll add so that you can see that, and then we also have a look at. So I will uncheck the smooth lookout for now, and we'll just look at this look at. The game object that we want to do the looking is the owner. It is the player's ship. And earlier in the videos, I set it up so that its forward direction was plus Z, which is the default direction that this wants to use. So we're going to tell the player's ship to look at the object ship aim location. And we have that stored, excuse me here, let me open this back up. This target object, notice it's in a variable container right now, and to the right, if I click these two little lines, it will switch and we can now drop an object in. So I can tell it to use this ship aim location as its target object. As far as this keep vertical goes, if the object happened to be higher or lower, keep vertical will say, no, I don't want you to look up or down, I just want you to look in that direction. And so I'll leave that checked, and I want this to happen every single frame. So now what's going to happen once this loads is the ship will always stay pointed wherever the object happens to be. Now this is a really fast response because it's updating constantly with no rotation speed involved. So if we look back at the actions here, let me uncheck the look at, and I'll check the smooth look at. This works similarly, so I'll tell it to target the ship aim location. The only difference here is that we have a rotation speed. And we also have a finishing tolerance. And so what this will do is it works a little bit slower if you don't want the ship to have instantaneous rotation. So notice now it takes a second for the ship to catch up, which keeps it from getting too willy-nilly as you whip your mouse around. And so I think what I'll do in this case is I'll remove this look at. I'll use the smooth look at instead, but I'll set the speed up a bit to maybe 10 and then test it again. Alright, and that feels a little bit better. Another thing that we could do is create a variable for this. So what I'll do instead here is I will click on the double lines, and where the speed value is, we now have a variable space. And I'll say new variable, and I'll call this the aim rotation speed. We'll be able to see that value in our variables window now, and if I select it, you can see that the value is at 0 currently. So I will hard set a constant for it, and then there's a handy little thing we can do down here in the bottom, which is check the value for the inspector. What that does is if you look under the player ship object in the inspector, and you come down to the FSM that we're currently looking at, which is this player ship aim FSM, and then you open up the controls window, as you can see I actually have this aim rotation speed now passed out here. And you can also see the name is a little bit long for this size of the window, so I can either expand it or I could name it shorter. That's up to you. This can be changed now outside of the FSM editor, which is very handy. And so if we ever decide I want to speed up or slow this value down, we can change it here, or I could actually have some effects in the game that maybe change that speed for me. So for now I'll leave it set to this aim rotation speed of 10, and I don't want it to finish, so I won't use a finished event. And then we'll just minimize that out. We'll give it one last quick test to make sure that using the variable works, and it does. We get a nice smooth look at this point. I don't need to be able to see the sphere object anymore. I mainly just did that so that you could see that we are dragging an object in space. So what I'll do is in the hierarchy, I'll select my ship aim location, and we have a sphere collider, and we also have a mesh renderer. Well, as far as this mesh renderer and sphere collider are concerned, we don't need them. All we need is the transform information of this object space. So I will select and remove this component. I will select and remove this component. This ship aim essentially is just an empty at this point with a transform node. And just to show you that it still works, I'll hit play, and now we're just dragging around an empty object in space and telling our ship to look at that. Now that the ship will aim wherever I have the mouse cursor on screen, I want to do a little work with the cursor itself. I don't want the player to be looking at this white arrow while the game is running. I would prefer that they had some form of aiming reticle. I could have this action set up on the player ship itself, but we're going to have a lot of other variables that need initialized, and we're going to need some scripting process to how the overall game proceeds forward. So what I'll do is in my hierarchy, I will create an empty game object, and it is at 0, so I don't need to reset it. But if it is not, I would like to set it at the 0 point. And then I will name this my game manager. This empty object can contain as many FSMs with as many actions as I would like it to. So I will add an FSM to it, and I will name this FSM maybe something like managing game. And then the actions that I'll have in state 1 are going to be setting up the game. And again, you can name these more or less anything you'd like as long as they make sense. So I have this managing the game FSM, and state 1 is setting up the game. Now the only thing I really need to be working with right now is something dealing with the mouse. So I will open up the action browser and type in the word mouse. And the action that I really want here is this set mouse cursor. So I'm going to double click to add it. We can add a texture for the mouse. We could import one of our own if we'd like. We can then hide the cursor, and we can also lock the cursor. So first off, let's start by picking a image. So I will drop down and use this drop down arrow that comes with Unity. And then we'll just hit play to see what this did. Now you can see that I have this drop down arrow point, but I also have the white arrow itself. So I'll stop this. And what I need to do is actually tell it to hide the cursor, which is a little bit non-intuitive because you would think it would actually hide the cursor entirely. But what it really is doing is it's hiding the default cursor and then only allowing us to see the aiming reticle image that we decided to use. As far as locking the cursor, what that does is it will lock the cursor to the dead center point of the screen. And that isn't really going to be very useful for us because I can't aim my ship now. The cursor isn't allowed to move. But this works really good for first-person games if you want the aiming reticle always at the center point of the screen. So I'll hit escape so that I can stop my game. And I'll leave the image set. I'll leave hide cursor checked, but I will uncheck lock cursor. When the game runs, our big white arrow goes away and we have a smaller reticle. And again, we could bring in another image if this isn't the one that you want to use, but this is a little bit better for gameplay and a little bit less in our way as far as the overall gameplay is concerned. All right, we will continue on in the next one.